up of citizens from the 5 commissioner districts of the county. The purpose of this board is to review the applications of property owners for relief from the strictest interpretation of the county ordinances. Our guidelines are established in state statutes, chapter 394.27, subsection 7. The decision made by this board is the result of whether or not a practical difficulty has been determined. If the board determines there is a practical difficulty, we then review the guidelines in the form of 6 criteria questions that are answered at the end of the applicant's request. All 6 questions must be answered in the affirmative to grant the request. Each request is evaluated on its own unique practical difficulty. Variances are granted to the land, not to the landowner. This board may, in addition, impose conditions to the granting of variances to ensure compliance. After your public hearing is complete, you may leave if you wish. I might add that the results of our voting and answering of the questions and our motions is not a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. It's our decision is final. So the first item of business for tonight is Kevin and Jody Olson, 5582 Concord Road, Cushing. It's an application for an after-the-fact variance to add on to a non-conforming structure. It's located in Scandia Valley Township. Kevin, Jody, would you please state your name for the record?
Sure. This is Kevin and
this is Jody
Olson.
Thank you very much. Amy, are you ready for the staff report?
I am, Mr. Chair. I just want to verify that you all can see my Board of Adjustment slides, if anyone can confirm that for me.
Good to me.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so again, this is an after-the-fact variance request to expand a non-conforming structure located in section 35 of Scandia Valley Township. The ordinance references for this request is section 301, 301.6, 706.1, and 706.3. And then here's a plat map of Scandia Valley Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here is the variance request received from the applicant. And here is an aerial photograph of the parcel, and that's outlined in blue. And then some oblique imagery of the parcel. And right now I am letting you know that I neglected to put my site photos in here, so I apologize. So I'm going to just get through these slides. All right. This parcel is located on Lake Alexander, and it is part of Birchdale Knolls subdivision, which was established in 1950. This is a non-conforming single lot, which means it's less than 30,000 square feet and 120 feet wide, and the property is 95 feet wide and 25,883 square feet. According to the assessor's records, there is a 720 square foot dwelling with a 6x16 roof over concrete, and the construction date is unknown. It is approximately 53 feet from the lake. And then here is another photograph of the cabin and its proximity and its setback to the lake. And then here is a photograph of the lake from the water. The applicant purchased this property in 2007, and the Land Services Department received 2 complaints regarding unpermitted construction occurring on the property. The complaint was verified, and the property owner was sent a first notice of violation. And then here is a copy of that. The open roof over concrete had been removed, and a larger addition had been constructed onto the cabin. And then here are photos of that and before and after. The applicant is requesting an after-the-fact variance to keep the 12 by 23 addition to the cabin. There is an approximate 10,266 square foot building envelope on the property. And there is a drawing of that. The impervious surface calculation with the project is 6.82% and 25% impervious surface is allowed. At the development review team meetings, staff discussed the following with the applicant: the circumstances under which the addition to the cabin came to be, residing, residing the cabin, and then the lien was in bad shape and decided to remove and add the addition. Right to maintain nonconformity but not to expand. Cabin is outside the shore impact zone. The after the fact variance criteria, stormwater control, and personal need, and what is reasonable for the property. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2. Shoreline development, goal D1. And then the comprehensive water plan goals and objectives would be surface water goal, objective B. Land use and development, objectives B and D. 58 notices were sent and no correspondence was received prior to the public hearing. And then here are your criteria questions, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if you are speaking, we can't hear you.
Oh, darn, I muted myself. I'll try that again. Sorry, thanks for pointing that out. I'd just like to add that on last Friday, May 7th, all 5 Board of Adjustment members, along with Amy Kowalczyk, viewed the property, and the applicant was not present, but we did view the property at that time. I guess now, I think we'll go right to the applicant and ask if you have anything to add at this point, how these circumstances came about, and yeah, how we got to where we are today in an after the fact kind of situation.
Sure. And I appreciate the opportunity to explain that. And I apologize. I reread the letter that was sent to me last week, just today, and I saw that you guys were going out there on the 7th, and I could have probably been there, but I didn't see that until today. So the project came to be because I was doing a roofing and siding project on the cabin, 2 things which you know are not required of permit, and just trying to bring the cabin up to a standard of care, because we had some siding on it that was rotten, and we had some window trim that was rotten and needed to be replaced and things like that. In the process of doing this siding project, I got 3 sides done, and I mentioned to my wife that that overhang was dilapidated as well and really needed to come down. And I was told that I could take it down, but I was going to have to replace it. And the following conversation ensued that, well, if I'm going to replace it, I should put pier footings down and support it properly. And gosh, if I'm going to do that, then it'd be just as easy to put a floor and walls around it. And once those words came out of my mouth, I couldn't take them back. I tried to call Morrison County and ask at that point what was needed as far as permitting to move forward with this, and did not. That particular day, for whatever reason, I got into a voicemail system, and I left a voice message asking somebody to get back to me and let me know, the next steps to move forward. It was during one of the weeks where Tim Walls had shut us down and told everybody to stay home, And I assumed that that was the case at Morrison County. And I did not make a second attempt at a phone call. I just waited for a couple weeks, didn't hear anything back. And as it was late fall, it was in September and late September, I think. We just wanted to get this siding job wrapped up so it didn't sit half done over the winter months. So we finished it, thought we would have an opportunity to come to the county and beg forgiveness this spring once we got back to the cabin. But my neighbors beat me to it. So that's how we ended up where we're at.
Okay, well, thank you. Your rationale puts us in an after the fact situation. Are you aware of, I mean, you understand what that means, correct? This after the fact
Yes.
approach
Yes,
to a variance?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Did you think of any other options at the time? You know, as we all gathered at the site last Friday, the first thought comes to mind, boy, it would sure be easy to move that cabin back 75 feet from the shore and meet all setbacks. Are you familiar with the ordinances that your property and your cabin do not conform to?
How did you arrive at the conclusion that that cabin would be easy to move back?
Well, we looked at it and thought that it just has a foundation under it. It doesn't have a basement. It looks like a fairly straightforward structure that would be easy to lift and move back 20 some odd feet and meet the 75-foot setback. And it just looks that way to us.
Yes.
And it would probably have been much easier prior to the addition putting on. You realize that once the non-conforming structures, every time you do something to them, change anything about them, add living space, sidewall or whatever, that you need a variance to do that. If you have a conforming structure, you don't need to do that. You can add on through the permitting process,
Okay.
over the counter permitting process. No variance needed.
I just want to point out that cabin has a granite fireplace in it. Granite stonework that goes up through the center of the cabin. There would absolutely be no way to move it. So that cabin would have to be torn down and then rebuilt. You simply could not move it.
Okay, that wasn't obvious from the outside.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
And we do leave our windows at the cabin open. And again, I apologize. I should have been there to show you around and let you in and everything else. But that thing that we added on is 12 feet out from the existing structure. And the other roof that was on there was at least half of that. I just read on the report Amy provided that it was 6 feet by 16 feet, but I think it was a little further out than that, but I'm not going to argue about it. But it just needed to be replaced. So we did a very small enclosed porch is what it amounts to.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to the other Board of Adjustment members and ask if they have any questions for the applicant, for staff, or for experts in the at the meeting in the public. We start out with Marv. Mr. Treadle, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I guess being out to that site, and I guess this question was to the applicant, but you actually asked it. And it is the comprehensive plan to bring things in compliance. Well, obviously it's not in compliance, and doing this puts it more out of compliance. But my question was, and you already asked it, that about if he given a thought, if we deny this, if he given a thought of having someone look at it to possibly move it and bring it in compliance. And it sounded like he felt that because of the granite, it couldn't happen. And I'm no expert in that, so it was just a thought. that's the only question I have for him at this time.
Okay. Brent, any questions for the applicant or staff?
I think I'm going to pose the question to Amy. I heard the applicant tell us that no roof or siding permit is required. But I just want to check with Amy if you're going to expand the roof footprint, is not a roofing permit required?
Mr. Chair, re-shingling and re-siding do not require land use permits, but re-roofing, so if you're removing the roof system and or expanding it, yes, that does require a permit.
Okay, so in this case, expanding the footprint of that roof, taking down the lean-to, expanding the roof footprint to the existing non-conformity would have required a permit, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and we would not have been able to permit it because it would have been considered expansion of a non-conforming structure, and so would have needed a variance in order for us to permit it.
Can I make
Okay.
a point of clarity there? Mr. Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Is that you, Brent?
may I make a point of clarity there?
Please do.
When I mentioned that, as you know, it would not have required a permit, I was talking about the re-siding job that I was doing and the re-shingling job that I was doing to the existing structure. At the point where I made the comment to my wife about adding that additional roof to replace the one that I took down, that's when I made the call to the county. So I assumed that that would take some sort of permitting process, but during this COVID time, I didn't get a hold of anybody. So I just wanted to make that clear that I wasn't saying that I didn't need a permit altogether. It's just up to the point of doing those three sides and making the decision to rip down the dilapidated overhang lean-to style roof and create one that was more in line with the roof line. That's when the decision was made to call the county.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Brent, any other questions? Does that answer your question?
It does, thanks.
Okay. Clint, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. This I'll direct towards the applicant, Kevin. So when you're going through this process, you kind of thought, well, you probably needed to have some permit or something, so you called the county. But before that, you know, owning this property, did you know that you were a non-conforming, that your cabin is a non-conforming structure before this process, or did you not understand that, or just never knew that that's what your property was, or can you enlighten me a little bit on that?
Sure, that's a good question. Actually, back when Jody and I first bought this property, I had a conversation with the county, whatever department, planning commission or whatever, land use probably, about the possibility of a future expansion project. And we were told at that time that this was a non-conforming cabin structure, and as such, we would only be able to add on to up to 50% of what we had there currently, which was 750 square feet or whatever it is. And of course, we owned it for many, many years before we did anything with it at all. And again, this started because it needed siding, and I didn't want to go around a dilapidated roof line. So to answer your question, we had some knowledge of the setback rules, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no more further as of right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave, do you have anything to add? Questions?
No, I do not. You know, I see that they did a nice job of doing it, but it's a difficult situation, and I think they probably should have tried a little harder to get a permit.
Okay, thank you. All right, Board of Adjustment, are we ready for public input? I'll take that as a yes. If not, say something. Okay, Sharon, are you ready to check out the people in attendance, see who wants to have input at this time?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am. Our first one up would be Don Swanson. Do you have anything to add to this application? Don Swanson, anything to add to this application? One final time, Don Swanson, anything to add to this application? Going down the list, Brian Flanagan, anything to add?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Denny Smith, anything to add to this application?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Katie Harms, anything to add?
No, thank you.
And that concludes my list, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I will ask 3 times though, if there's anybody else, and if there is anybody else, you certainly can interrupt and we will hear you. So at this point, is there anybody else from the public or in this hearing that would like to voice an opinion at this time? Okay, is there anybody else at this hearing that would like to voice an opinion at this time? Final call. Anybody else that would like to voice an opinion at this time? Okay, nobody else is stepping forward, so we will close the public input to this application. Okay, and that means that Board of Adjustments, we're on to the questions. Of course, there are actually 2 sets of questions for an after-the-fact variance. Amy, would you please go over that? You're much more expert at that than any of us. Could you explain why that is and what the rationale is?
I certainly can, Mr. Chair. So the first set of questions are your usual questions that every applicant must meet. They must show a practical difficulty in order to be granted a variance. And so the Board of Adjustment will go through the first set of criteria questions, considering the standard set of criteria that they would for any other request. If all of those questions are answered in the affirmative, then you would go to the second set of questions, which, or actually you have the option to go to the second set of questions, and Mr. Chair, you would ask the Board of Adjustment members if they'd like to do that. And so those are more discretionary questions that are laid out in ordinance. And that second set of questions is to be used when we have an after the fact situation. It's really more of a weighing and balancing as far as the circumstances under why you're considering something after the fact. And so so you'll get through the first questions. If those questions are not all answered in the affirmative, then you will not move on to the second set of criteria.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for everybody in attendance today. Again, we're going to go to this set of questions that you see on the screen that we have in front of us, and we're going to be reviewing those questions as if the applicant had gone through the correct procedures and brought them forward to us in a before the fact fashion rather than after the fact fashion. So how would we have answered question number 1? Is the request in harmony with the general purpose and intent of Morrison County land use ordinances and comprehensive plan? Hey, Marv, since you're a seasoned veteran on the board, I'm starting with you.
Okay. I don't, what I'm seeing is we try to bring things in compliance, and by them adding to it, it further pulls it out of compliance, you know, and knowing that it was out of compliance, or it was a
Marv, I'll just interrupt for just a second. It's really easy to mix up the words conformity and compliance. It's actually a complying structure because it's grandfathered in, but it's non-conforming because it does not meet the setback. So, yeah, it would
Mr.
be
Chair,
more
that's-
non-conforming.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt
Thank
you,
for
Marv.
correcting me, and that's what my next statement was, being 53 feet versus 75, creating this, and here it's creating that nonconformity. So I don't believe it is in harmony that way.
Okay. Sorry I interrupted you, Marv, but thank you.
That's fine there. Thank you.
Yep. All right, Brent, would you have anything to add to this?
No, I wouldn't at this time, no.
Okay. And my turn. Well, this is a non-conforming lot. It's 95 feet wide at the lake versus the 120 for a conforming lot. It's 25, almost 26,000 square feet, which is shy of the 30,000 of a conforming lot. As Marv pointed out, it's non-conforming in that it doesn't meet the 75-foot setback from the lake, but it does meet and exceed by just a few feet the shore impact zone, which we do hold dear and try to prevent any activity from happening in that zone. I'd agree with Marv that the purpose of the GOR ordinance is to prevent or to reduce nonconformities and to eventually have them all go away, which we know is not going to happen. But at that one at a time, we can maybe get, the properties to be more conforming at least, rather than less conforming. I haven't quite, it's a reasonable request to add a small amount onto a cabin. Whether there is a practical difficulty, I think we'll answer that further with the rest of the questions. But so I'm not weighing in positive or negative on this one yet. Clint Catherine, what do you have to add?
Well, kind of discussion here, with the impervious surface area, being 6.82% is well below the 25%, and the septic system meeting the required setbacks distance. So, you would say that part of it would be in harmony, with the general purpose and intent. But then on the other hand, now only being 53 feet away, like Dave stated, he's a few feet out of the shore impact zone. That's a good part of, but it's also bad that they're still not within 75 feet. But then you look around the neighborhood, there's a lot of surrounding properties that's too close to the lake and they're a lot bigger. So just some extra discussion here, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave, anything to add?
No, I think you've all covered it very well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question then. Is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? We'll start out with you, Brent.
Yeah, I think he's proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner, but obviously adding on to a non-conforming structure is not allowed. But I think using it as a cabin and expanding it for the uses that he wanted, I think he's proposing that, but it's not allowed.
Okay, thank you. Myself answering that same question, this is not you look at his neighbors and you would say right away with a pretty quick look that these lots are really developed. I mean, they've got as much on them as can fit almost. Their impervious surface, I would guess, would be much higher. I think the applicant is, proposing a very small addition onto a small cabin. You know, he was he's in the process of residing and reshingling, and he's taking good care of his property. You know, he's not overdeveloped by any means. It is a reasonable use, as Brent pointed out, not permittable without a variance. So, Clint.
No, I think between yourself and Brent's comments pretty much summed up everything that I had to answer that question. You guys did a good job on that, so I wouldn't have anything else to add at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brucher?
Yeah, I have nothing else to add. I think that Brent covered it very well, and you did as well. Thank you.
Okay, and Marvin?
Just a few things to add in. It is obviously a very small, lean porch there, and obviously stated that you said larger buildings around there, and they definitely got a far less impervious surface over there. So these were pointed out, but I just wanted to say, yeah, it's somewhat reasonable there.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Anybody have anything to add to question number 2? Okay, number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? I guess I have to start this one. This cabin and with the proposed addition is really dwarfed by the neighbors. It's a small cabin, small addition. It's on a small lot, but you know, we see much smaller lots than 90 by 26,000, 95 feet at the shoreline by 26,000. Essential character, you know, almost all of his neighbors are too close to the shore too. That doesn't make it a right thing. It just means that that is the character of the neighborhood. Because it is such a small and unimposing structure, I think it has a good chance of maintaining the essential character of the neighborhood. There's no activity between the cabin and the lake that would draw attention to anyone. It was probably well, it's a good thing that a neighbor did catch what was happening, but it would probably have to be somebody that was very familiar with the neighborhood to see that. So that's my thoughts on essential character. Clint?
Yeah, I said with the size of the other cabins in that area of the lake, I think this much smaller structure does maintain the essential character of locality. If anything, maybe not because it's so much, maybe it's because it is so much smaller. I would like to see the structure further back, but that's just probably not possible. But that's all I'd like to add to that, I guess.
Okay, Dave?
You know, I would have to say that, yes, it does maintain the essential character, but also we have to consider with the character comes compliance with the regulations that they all have to live by as well. So yes, it does maintain essential character. I'll also have to say yes on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Marv, anything to add?
I just wanted to point out it's a very modest cabin, and like you said, it's dwarfed by these larger ones, and they did a very nice job with the siding and just to make it blend in there very well. That's it.
Okay, and Brent?
Nothing further. Everybody else has covered it well.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything to add? Anybody have anything to add to essential character? Okay, we'll move on to the next. Is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Let's start out with you, Clint.
I believe it is somewhat, you know, with the smaller lot size and you know, some of that downhill slope on the south edge of their property, and and the sewer where it is, it gets a little tight. But I do think, you know, there is a little more buildable room, you know, on the non-lake side. You know, that was probably done, you know, that was before their time. But so yeah, I think it's somewhat unique to that property, just being boxed in there. It's kind of in a little ravine there.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Okay, Dave, anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think Clint covered it very well. Thank you.
Okay, Marv?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, Brent?
Yes, I would agree with what Clint had said, that it is unique to the property, being its size and location.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and practical difficulties. I'm looking at the applicant's application, and is the practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? And he answered the question, our cabin was still in good shape overall, and it didn't make any sense to tear it down and add a small addition, or tear it down to add a small addition. Yeah, practical difficulties are unique to the property. It's unique to the property, or like, you know, had been stated very well by Mr. Catherine, you know, the size of the lot, possibly the location of other things that are already there, like the sewer, the way the lot slopes. Those are potentially practical difficulties. Most, you know, but there is still a very large building envelope that this cabin could be moved into and have all of the additions you wanted within reason, and that would be permittable over the counter. It's tough to find a practical difficulty here. Okay, anybody have anything else to add to number 4? Okay, then we'll go on to question number 5. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Dave, we're starting out with you on this one. Mr. Brucher?
I would say that other than the fact that it was a non-conforming structure originally, that the addition was not created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners. I think you pointed out that there were other possible options, but I would say no, it was not created. Thank you.
Okay, Marv?
Well, something that I did want to point out, you know, this was built, cabin in 1954, before we had, you know, the 75-foot setback rules, but that does not give them permission to not go to get the proper permitting on that. So that's where they're solely at fault at that. But where the cabin placement was, they have nothing to do with that.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Brent?
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with anything other than prior landowners and the current landowner.
Yep, I'd agree. It would be, it's difficult to, like Marv stated though, the only thing we've got to go on that we could possibly say is that way back in 1954, this happened. Well, but adding on, that is a decision solely made by the landowner. Clint, your observations on this one?
Yeah, I don't have nothing to add to this, I guess.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to question number 6. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Starting with you again, Marv.
Well, as you stated there too, finding that practical difficulty is kind of tough. And, you know, it's more of a personal than anything. But it does, you know, more than economic. They actually, you know, the aesthetics of it. And, you know, you see the before and after pictures, what they did to it. It does look nice. And it wasn't a huge financial decision over there. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, Brent, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it involves more than just economic considerations. There's you know, many things regarding this that come into play, regarding its location, the sewer location, the well location, the lot slope, the water drainage, all of those things come into consideration on this.
Yeah, I guess I just have to agree with what's already said, and I have nothing really to add at this point. Clint?
Nah, just other than, you know, the intent was just to update the cabin on a small scale and the small amount of buildable space, you know, it just, yeah, I don't know. I think there's more than just economics here, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Dave Brucher?
I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Okay, we haven't talked about any conditions that would change a no answer to a yes answer. I don't know of any conditions that would help us in this process. Can anybody think of anything? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead,
Chair.
Clint. Yep.
I'll take a playbook from you. You know, if we would move forward with this, being it is so close to the shore impact zone, you know, maybe we could put on something where they'd gutter it and direct that water away from the lake. I don't know if that would help anybody ease their mind at all or not. I don't know.
Yep. And
Being we're so close to the shore impact zone.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps a shoreland review with the shoreland specialist from the office at the same time. So it'd be stormwater and shoreland review. That might be helpful. Okay, if we get to that point, I think that might be something good to consider if we are all on that page by then. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay, then we will proceed to vote. First question is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinances and Comprehensive Plan? Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is yes. Clint?
I'm going to say yes.
And Dave?
I have to say no.
Okay. Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? We'll start with Brent.
Yes.
Okay, myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
And Marv?
Yes.
Okay. Number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Starting out with myself, and the answer is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
And Brent?
Yes.
Okay, number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Start out with Clint.
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
No.
And Brent?
Yes.
And myself is no. Okay, number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? We're going to start out with Dave.
No, it is not.
Okay, Marv?
No.
Brent,
No.
myself is no, and Clint.
No.
Okay, number 6. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Marv,
Yes.
Brent,
Yes.
myself, yes. Clint,
Yes.
and Dave.
Yes.
Okay, we have a resounding no in number 5 and 3 no's to 2 yeses in number 1. Before we make the motion, is everybody comfortable with the fact that, we're not answering number 5 as an after the fact? We're mentioning, or we'd be considering it as we would have considered it even if it was a normal variance request. Is everybody okay with that? Anybody thinking differently?
This is Brent. I'm okay with that.
Okay. That's how you answered it based on how you, if it was a first time question rather than an after the fact question.
Correct.
Correct. As did I. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Otherwise, we'll just assume that's what you did too. Okay. All right, then I don't think there's any condition that could be added to negate number 5 to reverse our question there. So is there a motion at this time?
Mr. Chair, this is,
yes, Mark.
I make a motion to deny this request.
Okay, Marv has made the motion to deny. Is there a second?
This is Brent, and I'd make a second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to deny this request. Is there any other discussion on this before we vote? Is there any other discussion? We'll proceed to vote. All in favor say aye or nay if opposed. I'll roll call. Marv?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself is aye. Clint?
Aye.
And Dave?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We are denying this request for the after the fact variance. Since we've denied it, we do not proceed on to the second set of questions. Though there are some things that could be discussed there, like as to why the applicant didn't try a second call. And I imagine forever he'll ask himself that too. All right, so if the applicant has any questions, you can call Land Services.
Do you have a good attorney?
Excuse me? Okay, no other questions at this time, but if you have any questions, you can call Land Services. Okay, we'll move on with the second item of business tonight. If I can find my sheet, here we go. Second item of business tonight is Brian Flanagan request at 2052 Fish Trap Lake Drive, Cushing, Minnesota. It's an application for a variance to add on to a replaced cabin. This is also located in Scandia Valley Township. Brian, would you state your name for the record?
Brian Flanagan, and my wife, Chris, is here.
Christine Flanagan.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Amy, looks like you're ready with your staff report.
I am, Mr. Chair. So again, this is a variance request to expand a non-conforming structure located in section 32 of Scandia Valley Township. Let's see if we can get my slides to go here. All right, and the ordinance reference for this request is section 301, 301.6, and 706.1. And then 706.1A. And 706.3. Here's a plat map of Scandia Valley Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here is the variance request received from the applicant. Here's an aerial photograph of the parcel outlined in blue. And then some oblique imagery of the structure. And then here's some shoreline photographs. This is a non-conforming single lot, which means it's less than 30,000 square feet and 120 feet wide. The lot is 50 feet wide and approximately 12,204 square feet. On July 7th, 2020, the Board of Adjustment granted a variance to the property. And here is a copy of that approval of variance. And that is to remove the existing bathroom and deck on the south side of the cabin and construct a new cabin addition in its place. So a total of 337.3 square feet was going to be removed, and 337.3 redesigned square feet would be added as living space, and that was granted with 5 conditions, and those are on the screen. On August 5th, 2020, the Land Services Department granted the land use permit to construct the addition as approved within the variance. And then here's a copy of that. On April 9th, 2021, the Land Services Office received notice that the existing cabin had been removed from the property. The office verified that, in fact, the existing cabin had been removed. This action voided the variance granted on July 7th, 2020, and the subsequent land use permit issued for the addition. The office served a stop work order and a first notice of violation. And then here's the stop work order and the notice of violation. Historically, this property was part of a resort, and the resort has since been split into individual parcels, each with a cabin on it. According to the assessor's records, a 948 square foot cabin built in 1926 existed on the property. It was located 33 feet 7 inches from the lake with a deck that extended lakeward. That was 23 feet 6 inches from the lake. And then here is what was on the property before on the left, and then what the current state of the property is now on the right. This parcel has access via easement using the neighboring driveway to the east, and the applicants purchased this property in 2003. The applicant has applied for a permit to replace the existing cabin, and that is allowed under section 301.6A. The applicant is requesting a variance to enlarge the replacement structure by 337.4 square feet, and this expansion would be on the back or the road side of the cabin. The existing impervious surface calculation is 17.92%, and in 25% impervious surface is allowed. And then here's the impervious surface calculation provided by the applicants. There's a natural depression on the property that appears to accumulate water, and here to the right is a drawing of the elevation contours on the lot. An approximate 5,221 square foot building envelope exists on the property, and that's illustrated on the right. Although the Land Services Department did not discuss this variance with the applicant at a DIRT meeting, the applicant did have conversation with the Land Services Director about the following: circumstances of the total removal of the cabin. Spirit in which the variance was granted was of the understanding limitations existed due to an existing structure. There was difficulty in receiving the first variance. It will be challenging to get the variance without the confines of the existing structure. Available building envelope and stormwater movement on the property, and the right to replace the existing cabin as it had always been. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2. Shoreline development, goal D1. And then the water plan goals and objectives would be the surface water goal, objective B. Land use and development, objectives B and D. Suggested conditions, if approved, would be the property owner shall implement the suggestions and recommendations of the Morrison County Shoreline Specialist as outlined within the letter of June 25th, 2020 and attached in your packet. The property owner shall gutter the entire cabin and direct the water to the south side of the lot. Property owner shall remove the 27 square foot concrete sidewalk at the lakeside deck and replace with grass as indicated as item B on the attached proposed addition and lakeside deck modifications. Property owner shall remove 97 square feet of the lakeside deck and shall replace with grass as indicated as item C on the attached addition and lakeside deck modifications. And remove 207 square feet of the ground level portion of the wood deck and replace with grass as indicated in item D. Mr. Chair, these are the conditions that were attached to the variance that was granted in 2020. 80 notices were sent and 1 email in support of the request received prior to the public hearing. I'll read that now. This is from Shelley and Mark Check. This is in regards to the letter we received in the mail concerning the variance for Brian Flanagan, who we have a cabin down the road from. It's good to hear that cabin owners want to improve and update their property when needed so they can continue to make memories forever with their families on the lake. Updates are necessary as families grow, increase value, and to keep the businesses alive around the area. For that reason, we are in favor of the Flanagans to add onto a replaced cabin and can't wait to see the results. All right, and then Mr. Chair, there are your finding of fact and decision questions. And Mr. Chair, you will need to unmute.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Would you mind going back to the slide with the conditions that were proposed last summer? I think that might be helpful in guiding some of our discussion here.
Is this the slide you want, or do you want the recorded variance with the conditions?
Whichever one is clear. I thought there was one that we were looking at earlier that looked a little clearer than this, but this would be okay. Whatever you think, Amy. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry I made you go back, Amy. The other one was more clear than this one. If you would go back to that, but I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Flanagan, this is generally your time to respond to help us all figure out how we got here. As I recall, well, back last summer, Mr. Treadle and I were on the Board of Adjustment along with 2 other board members. We were short 1 member at the time, so we're working with 4. Now we're at full force with 3 new members, but Marv and I are still here, and we recall it quite well. This is our 3rd meeting in less than a year. So, Mr. Flanagan, could you explain how we got to this point today? And
Yes.
how you recall the first meeting, how you recall the second meeting, and how you came about getting your variance at that point, and why we didn't grant it to you on the first one.
Sure. So the first one, I think, and that goes back to, I believe, what was June of last year.
Correct.
The first one, I don't think I presented a very good practical difficulty, and I think what also happened is that there was a tie vote on a few of the requirements, and then therefore the board ended up with a tie vote to approve and two to deny, and which I believe ended up being that that was a non-decision. So I was allowed to come back the following month in July, and again, at that point, I understood what the practical difficulty was better. And then through some discussion, we received an approval based on the vote of all 6 items.
Okay. As I recall too, at the first meeting, we were discussing conditions, and those seemed to be new to you and needed to be, and you didn't have real good answers at that time on the conditions that we were proposing at the time. And you came back a little more with a little more clarity on what was acceptable to you as conditions. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. So that's where we were a year ago. Well, how did we get here today?
Because of my mistake. So there's a couple of things I guess I'd like to just ask before I just start explaining. Would you like me to explain kind of how, you know, because we understand the process that we went through last year, and I'd be happy to go through that again if that would be helpful, especially for the 3 new members. But also there's another part of it as to why I received a stop work order and so on. So would you like me to concentrate on one or the other, or just try to touch on both?
I guess I'd leave that up to you, but before you begin that, I'd like to clarify that there was discussion, a fair bit of discussion, as to why you weren't moving the cabin last summer.
That's correct.
Okay, and your response at that time was that it was in too good a shape to move, I think.
Well,
how do you recall?
Well, actually, that played into it a little bit, but more was the location of where the cabin would have had to have moved because of the low area that exists in the lot itself. That would have required, if by moving and just even if we kept the existing footprint of what was the cabin, if we'd moved that back 75 feet, the southern part of the cabin, so the part of the cabin that's closest to Fish Trap Lake Drive, would have been in kind of that low area that we described and talked about, and I believe that people were able to go and see, especially if you're able to visit the cabin. And the way that we would have been able to correct that at that point, and would still be the case now, is through earthwork. You know, whether it would be, and it would require a fair amount of soil adjustment, which would then impact a couple of different things. It would impact the cabin to the east, because again, you saw their driveway was there, so that would push water into their driveway, probably into their garage, and then affect drainage, potential drainage that way. It would also affect the lots directly to the west. If you saw on the existing lot, there's a small wetland that exists between the adjacent lot to the west and the lot adjacent to that lot. And when we get either if the water level is high, or if there's a fair amount of rain, that small wetland fills up really quickly, and then the water works its way into the yard. And unfortunately, one thing that does exist as well is that on Fish Trap Lake Drive, if you had a chance to look at that, the road slopes down towards the backyards, or the southern ends of the lots, and even there's a hill on the south side of Fish Trap Lake Drive, so the water that drains off of that hill then drains onto the road, eventually all ends up into kind of those 3 lots. It would be my lot and the two lots to the west. So if we were to adjust that, we would be impacting the neighboring lots more than just impacting ours.
Okay, thank you
Mhm.
for clarifying your perceived practical difficulty. I know back last summer at the second meeting, you convinced me that it was a practical difficulty, and that's what swung my vote. I'm not so sure anymore after our viewing on Friday. All five of us were there Friday, along with Amy. You were not present, but I think now is probably some good time for input from the other board members. I've said enough for now, and you will have a chance to reply to their questions. So if we
Excuse me,
could,
Mr. Chair, can I ask one question, please?
Yep.
Would it be possible just, or would it make sense to explain a little bit as far as why the existing cabin is no longer there? Does that factor into this? I mean, or would you like to kind of know unfortunately what happened?
I'll leave that up to the other members to ask that question if they'd like. I'm not interested.
Okay.
Okay. So questions for Mr. Flanagan, questions for the staff. We'll start out with you, Clint.
Okay, Mr. Flanagan. So where does that water go? You know, you said there's a little wetland there. Does it just seep in? You know, like when it accumulates in your yard, does it just seep in, or does that low piece, does that drain anywhere, or does it just sit there?
It just sits there. So depending on the summer, sometimes we can't, for instance, mow part of the back of the southern part of the yards there because the water is just sitting in that area.
Well, so when we were out there, we did a little measuring, and if you would bring it back, you know, to meet setbacks, cabin would be right on the edge of your neighbor's garage as far as south those would be. So it'd be right before the dip. But you know, without knowing where that water goes, I mean, you still got to get into your yard. You still got to get into the cabin and stuff. I don't think by moving the cabin it would affect the water, but by redoing the driveway and having parking, that would probably affect the water. Get pushed from one neighbor to the next. So that was just one comment or discussion. But anyways, so last year you had this variance, and of course it all changed. But could you tell us some of them restrictions? You know, like tearing down sidewalk and decks and things like that. How much of that stuff you got done, or if any?
Sure. We did get all of the concrete that was existing removed, and then there was an existing deck and an existing bathroom extension that was removed. But the portion of the deck between the cabins and then the reduction of the deck on the north side towards the lake, that hasn't been completed yet.
Okay. I think I'm good on questions for now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave, do you have questions at this point?
No, I don't have anything. I think Clint kind of covered the same things that I was thinking about as far as that distance went. You know, as far as a practical difficulty, but I think that Clint covered it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay. Marv, questions?
Yes. First question I have is for Mr. Flanagan is, as I look at that old foundation, that looks quite dilapidated. Have you looked at, or has your contractor looked at that and inspected that well?
Yes, he has, and he made some improvements to the inside of the foundation.
Okay, because on the outside, she looks tough, and I thought, man, you're in this a lot deeper than you expect it to be, obviously, when you start tearing that down. And I thought, wow, you know, here you're in it this far. How much more would it be to go ahead and bring this in compliance and move it, shift the whole thing over, and then you'd really have something. Is kind of where I was thinking about it, especially when we took the measurements, what would fit in there. And, you know, it is kind of the county's goal to bring these into compliance. And being that was so close to the lake, that's something to consider. But I was wondering if you had that inspected. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Brent. Thank you, Marv.
I would just ask Brian if you could, for my benefit, being a new board member and not having the luxury of some of the others and understanding, why wasn't the variance that you received last year completed along with all of the conditions before the cabin was torn down, and how did we end up with a cabin torn down and now a reapplication?
Yeah, that's a fair question. It basically, we're working with an old cabin, and when I applied for the variance last year, we hadn't done really any work or any kind of looking into how the cabin existed. We were more looking to see, okay, what's the possibility to make this work? And when we were approved and then pulled our permit, that's when we started to do some of the work. And when the wall material came off and when the ceiling panels came down, that's when our contractor is in through kind of his input and insight, just showed the shape that everything was in. You know, as examples, the roof was sagging and was kind of bouncy when he was up on top of the roof. A lot of the beams were cracked or sometimes even missing with some mold and mildew there. And the walls were unfortunately not really in too much shape in any condition that was much better than that. So I listened to the contractor, but ultimately, again, it came down to my decision. He asked, do you want to tear off, for instance, remove the walls? And I said, yes, go ahead. My mistake, though, again, the basis of the decision seemed like it was the right thing to do because of the existing condition of everything. I just didn't go about it necessarily in the right way. I should have called Amy and her team beforehand. I'm not certain what the outcome of that may have been, but one thing I do want to really, and I don't know if it's a factor, but please understand that there was never any malice involved or intended with this. It was me thinking I'm doing the right thing, and I didn't. And I should have reached out to Amy. But the one thing I really want to stress here is the structure that would be replacing the existing cabin is going to be the exact same as what the cabin, or as the cabin existed. What I mean by that is that the walls wouldn't be any larger, either north, south, or east, west. They'd be the same height. The roof would be the exact same size and have the exact same pitch and have most likely, again, even a slightly lower, but we'll just say the exact same peak height as well. The only difference is it would have proper walls, it would have, egress windows and electricity and plumbing that actually was meeting code. So again, it was never our intention to just go and tear down. It just felt like that was the thing to do. So again, that's how we got here. It was an error. It was a mistake, but that's how we got here.
Okay, thank you. Brent, any other questions?
No, that helps me understand things a little better. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Is there any other questions by the planning or the Board of Adjustment members for the Flanagans or for Amy at this time, or for anybody else out there before we go over to the public input?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I wanted to ask this when I'm making an assumption. If this would be approved, would it also include all the conditions that we had from the previous meeting?
That would be up to us, but Amy, would you please clarify that?
Yep, Mr. Chair, you're exactly right. So since there is really no previous variance to be acted upon, it would be incumbent on the Board of Adjustment to place whatever conditions you want on this variance. The recommended conditions by staff are the conditions that were placed on the previous variance, but you have the ability to change, keep them the same, change them, remove them, whatever you see fit.
Okay, that answer your question, Marv?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair. And what I know we're not to that point yet, but I just wanted to ask that question there. Thank you.
Okay, if I'm correct, Amy, the old variance is out the window with this, I mean, is not existent anymore with this cabin removal because we have a new set of circumstances to consider, correct?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. A year ago, there was a cabin removal and was not on the table at the time. Today, there is no cabin. Okay, so are we ready for public input, board
Mr.
members?
Mr. Chair, this is Clint.
Go ahead, Clint.
I'd like to just maybe make a comment now before we get into the other stuff, because just one thing, so the applicant, everybody's clear. You know, last year maybe it was a tough decision to do this variance, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It's just one thing, so he knows it's a tough decision for us because of the circumstances of the cabin being torn down. Not that you did a good deed and trying to redo your cabin, that's great, but being in the shore impact zone, that's just a hard thing for us to swallow. And when you have a cabin there, we understand, you know, the hardship's a little bit different. So maybe some of the questions you're probably wondering, well, why are they asking that? You know, I was through this before, but it's just a hard thing. And I'd never ask you to move your cabin back, but now that it's tore back, that's why you maybe heard a few of us just saying, well, could you move the cabin back? Because we're just trying to really protect that shore impact zone around our lakes and rivers, and just make it be just a little bit better that way. Here's kind of an opportunity for that. So, but we'll.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Clint. That's a very good point to make. Anybody else, or are we ready to move on to public input? Okay, I think we're ready for public input at this time then. Sharon, ball's in your court.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first person I have is Don Swanson. Anything to add to this application? Don Swanson, anything to add to this application? One final time, Don Swanson, anything to add to this application? Again, if you do need to have any input, you will need to unmute yourself. So going forward, Denny, do you have anything to add to this? Denny Smith, anything to add?
Well, a question. If this was a situation where there had been a fire that destroyed the cabin, would the board be wanting the homeowner to move the cabin back?
Yes.
Okay, just curious.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll take your question and answer that after all of the public input is complete.
Okay,
Any other questions, sir?
no, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sharon.
And then the last one is Katie Harms. Anything to add to this application?
Hi, thank you. So I do have some comments. We are the owners of the cabin immediately to the, I got to see if I do this right, east. And Brian and Chris have been incredible neighbors. We own a couple of the properties to the east, actually 3 to be exact. So we've been up there for quite a while, since 2001. I'm heartsick for Brian and Chris and what they've experienced. The good things that I'm hearing you guys talk about is the shore impact zone. And of course, we all want to maintain and improve the lake. And that's very important. And when Brian originally came forward and this was approved, it was approved with the conditions that the impact to the lake be removed. So by some of the deck being removed and moving things back and planting grass, and that was part of it. There was definitely hardships, and it's interesting because it's pretty dry up there right now. So you guys, in your viewing of it on Friday, probably didn't see really what it's been like up there. And I can tell you, there have been springs where there has been literal ponds for up to a month in our backyards. And when we went through some changes of the cabin on the second one over, we went through a lot of landscaping issues and all of that, where we tried to dissipate some of that runoff. So moving a cabin back is going to change all of that. And that would be a huge difficulty after we just put a lot of time into that. Now, while the cabin is not there anymore, Brian and Chris's cabin is not there, the foundation is still there, the footprint is there, and my understanding is they legally are able to put back up what they already have. So if they put back up what they already have existing, then they get to keep the deck that is out towards the lake and nothing changes. The deck in the back would go back on. So exactly what they had. So it seems to me that when you approved this last time, it was a bettering for everyone. Now, no one, particularly not the Flanagans, expected that they would be tearing a cabin down. They wanted to be using their cabin this year. They had everything on track. I mean, our cabins sit 5 feet apart essentially, so we spent a lot of time talking. So we were looking forward to them being up at the cabin and using it. When you have something like that in your family for years, you feel very fortunate to be able to use it. And they're losing an entire season because of this. So they certainly didn't intend to tear a cabin down. I think we all wanted to see that built, and we were looking forward to that happening. So I encourage you to continue to keep the shoreland impact, and I also the practical difficulties and the difficulty for that area to move a cabin back. It would be really, really difficult for others. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Sharon?
Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Okay, then I will ask 3 times if there's any other input from the public, and then we will close the meeting to the public. Is there anybody else in attendance that would like to speak at this time? Is there anybody else in attendance that would like to speak at this time? Final offer, anybody at the meeting that would like to speak at this time? If not, we will close the meeting to public input. And we do have the one carryover question from the one gentleman about if the cabin burned down, what would happen in that situation. Amy, can you field that for us, please?
I sure can, Mr. Chair. There are provisions in state law that deal with replacement of nonconformities, and there's specific language on if something is damaged due to peril, which of course would be a fire, and it depends on the extent of damage. So if the structure had succumbed to fire and was more than 50% damaged in the eyes of an assessor or appraiser, then they have a time frame in which they can pull a permit to replace. And they would need to be doing that within 180 days. But then there also is a caveat in state law that does allow the county to put requirements on the replacement, and that would include moving it back or bringing it further into conformity than what it had been before.
Okay, thank you. Board of Adjustment members, does that answer that question well enough for you? I'll take that as a yes. Then I think it's time to proceed on to the criteria questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before we go to these criteria questions, I believe we cannot answer them fully without attaching the conditions that we ended up approving last time. And my recommendations are as the previous approval that we attach them same conditions.
So that when we're answering these criteria questions, we would have those conditions in mind, and that would potentially alter our answers because conditions could be in place. Is that correct, Marv?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I think that's a reasonable thought process. They were well thought through conditions a year ago. Perhaps there are more conditions that could help answer a negative finding of fact to a positive one. Perhaps there are no number of conditions that could change it from a negative to a positive. But as long as we have that in mind, that these are potential conditions that could help us answer an otherwise negative question to the affirmative. Did I muddy that up enough so everybody's confused? Are we ready for the questions? We must be ready for the questions. Okay, the first question is the request in harmony with the general purposes intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? We're starting out with Clint tonight on that question. The biggest question of the, and it's yours to go with, Clint. You lucky guy.
Yeah. You know, if we go through with this and we put on them conditions, it does help it bring it somewhat in harmony. I don't know, you know, being 30 some feet from the lake, if that's totally in harmony with the ordinance or not, and a comprehensive plan, putting conditions on that we got kind of stated going along with the ones from last year, it does help bring it towards that. So I'm not quite sure on this yet.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave?
I'm reserve judgment too until we come a little further on this one, just as Clint has. Thank you.
Okay. Marv?
Mr. Chair, so as something we want to point out, obviously it's a non-conforming lot, very tight, very close, 33 feet versus the 75-foot setback in the shore impact zone. And our foundation is in tough condition. And I mean, here we have an opportunity to bring it in compliance, but bringing in compliance, as Ms. Katie Harms pointed out, could create some issues for the neighbor. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. With the conditions it makes it a little bit more palatable. But, you know, we have an opportunity to bring it in compliance. So I'm still up in the air on this.
Thank you, Marv. Brent?
I think it is in harmony with the general purposes and the intent of the land use ordinance.
Okay. Do you have any particular observations that lend you to think that?
Well, he's bringing it forward. Obviously, he's got the stop order. He did have, although we're not considering this at this time, the variance for the addition last fall, and he can build up the existing cabin where it is. So he would be coming to us now at this time to talk about that addition to the back. And that is afforded to him under the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my turn on this one. As it's been pointed out, it's a 50-foot wide lot. 120 feet is a conforming lot. It's a 12,200 square foot lot. 30,000 is the minimum for conforming. Currently, the structure is 33.7 feet away from the lake, the house, and the deck, the lakeside deck, only 23 feet away. As has been pointed out and has been thoroughly discussed with the applicant in 2 previous meetings to this and in this meeting, that the shore impact zone is pretty sacred for us. Would be, and as one of the neighbors pointed out, it would be nice to make some improvements as our conditions somewhat as a bargaining chip would make the applicant do. I like to think that all of our lakeshore owners would like to do the right thing without us leveraging them to do them, without us saying, well, we'll give you this if you'll do that. I'd like to think that they know what's best for the lakeshore and they'd be willing to implement those practices, whether or not we grant a variance or not. That's my thinking. The intent of the ordinance is to protect shoreland, to preserve natural settings, to control surface water runoff and erosion. We noticed there was erosion at the lakeshore last year, and to meet ordinance setbacks. You know, it's almost like a fire. Right now, you have nothing on that foundation. It's a good time to consider moving it back. I'm thinking. But we'll address that further down on the practical difficulty of that wet area. But I'd like to discuss that further down. So those are my observations, that this does nothing about this is in harmony with the purposes and intent of the Morrison County land use. Okay, anybody have anything else to add to question number 1? Question number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? We're starting out with Marv on that one.
You know, with the conditions, and as you pointed out, we hoped that we wouldn't have to leverage the cabin owners, landowners to do the right things, but sometimes it seems like you have to do that. But with these here conditions, it is somewhat reasonable. Would it be more reasonable to have a setback of 75? Possibly. So it is somewhat reasonable.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Brent?
I think it is reasonable, you know, considering had he moved forward last year with the variance he had, and attached it to the building and completed that and completed all of the conditions, those would already be in play right now. He then could have taken the majority of the cabin down and rebuilt it. So I think it's proposing something that's reasonable, considering the future impact to that drainage area in the back as well. That's concerning when you have a gathering spot, if you will, where water pools and can stay there for months at a time. It's concerning to the neighbors as well, and to others impacted by the potential of moving that structure back.
Well, thank you, Brent. My turn. One thing that isn't reasonable is impervious surface. Now, I know that the entire property meets the impervious surface of goal of being under 25%. But one thing that can't be overlooked here is that if we're looking at the first 75 feet from the shoreline and all of the structures that are currently in it and would be in it, even with conditions, you'd be at over 50% impervious surface just in that 75-foot area. There should be very little in that first 75 feet from the shoreline. Nothing, almost nothing, other than access to the lake in the first 50 feet. So reasonable. Is it reasonable to continue this non-conforming structure? I don't believe it is. On to Clint.
I think it's reasonable to the extent that this is a small addition. It was already surface area used as a deck. It just, he just wants to change it to a livable space. But then, now that the cabin's tore down, you could maybe move it back. It'd be a lot more reasonable if it was 75 feet away. But I think just the intent of putting this little addition on, I think that's reasonable, because there was already an imprint there from a deck, and he's just changing it to a livable space.
Okay, thank you, Clint. And Dave?
I think it's reasonable, given the conditions that you've already put on. I think if you followed those conditions, it would be reasonable, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have anything to add to question number 2 before we go on to 3? Okay, question number 3. Will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? And we're starting that one with Brent.
I think it will. The essential character in the locality, a lot of those, being that was a former resort area and had some of the cabins, maintained over the years and keeping with the character of the entire area along that shoreline. I think it is.
Okay. Most, as Brent pointed out, there's lots of nonconformity in the area. Everybody up and down the shoreline there because of the way it was plotted out years ago in a resort and existing structures. Does that mean that we should accept nonconformity as the character, or should we try to gain ground on getting with by trying to meet setbacks better than they are? Three wrongs don't make a right. I'll leave it at that. Clint, essential character.
I somewhat agree with what kind of both of you said so far. It does tie in with the surrounding cabins, and a lot of them are too close already. But the one thing it doesn't maintain this character with is, you know, the shore impact zone being it's so close to the lake. But I think overall it does show, you know, the eccentricity with the locality. I don't know. There's a little bit of both there, I guess.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave?
You know, I'd have to agree with Clint's well thought out analysis of the situation. It does, it's part of the character of that, with the caveats that it is too close to the shore, but I agree with Clint's analysis. Thank you, Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and Marv?
Well, I'll use your drive-by theory here. For lakeside, everything's so tight, and where it's in between, it fits in there very well. You'd never know it. From the roadside, it's far enough away you would notice it, so it fits in.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Question, anybody have anything to add to question 3 before we move on to 4? Okay, question number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? I get to go first on that one. Well, in the first meeting last year, I voted no, that there was no practical difficulty. In the second time when we reconvened, the applicant made a case for that wet area being the practical difficulty. Of course, I hadn't viewed the cabin a year ago. It was optional. COVID rules were in place. Now that I've been out there and see it, of course, it's, as the neighbor pointed out, it's a dry spring. Things look differently. But that wet area, whether it was pushed back another 10 feet, would still be, there could still be a retention area that would not move water to other properties. I am not looking at that as a practical difficulty at all now. Surely there is a point to be made on that whole area being wet and water not having many places to go. But by moving the cabin back to meet the 75-foot setback, there would be no change in water running off the property. If there was, it could be bermed to prevent it. There could be stormwater management that would prevent that. So I'm finding no practical difficulty unique to the property other than ordinance, and we can't call ordinance a practical difficulty. We can't call existing structures a practical difficulty. We can only find practical difficulty in that there is no alternative because of the design of the property. Clint.
I think he summed it up really good, Dave. It's kind of where I was going with what I had, so I'm gonna piggyback off what you said. You know, with the total overall surface, it wouldn't really change. So the water's still gonna get there. It's either gonna go to the lake or it's gonna go there. We don't want it to go to the lake, so we can't use that drainage as a practical difficulty. The same amount of water is gonna get there no matter where the cabin is.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave?
I'll have to agree with what you two have already said. I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Okay, Marvin?
I have to agree with both what was stated by the board members here, but something I would point out too, if they would make changes, whatever we would, or they would move it back, we would make sure that, well, I guess it would be up to the land department about having a shoreline specialist in there because of the water. Could it be controlled? Obviously, it could be controlled, guttered, ran there. So it should not be a big issue to the neighbors if you have a shoreline specialist design that.
Okay, thank you, Marv. And Brent?
I don't have anything further to add than what's already been stated by the others.
Okay. If nobody has anything else to add, we'll move on to question number 5.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
Just one thing, you know, we haven't talked about yet is the septic yet. You know, I think it's just a tank there. You know, we'd have to think about where that would go and things like that also when we're talking about these things. You know, we kind of just overlooked that on this practical difficulty thing. You know, so I don't know if that changes anybody's thoughts or ideas. You know, I'm one too, the same thing what you said with, I think the water's all going to go to the hole no matter to that dip, no matter where you go. But then where would the sewer go then, you know?
And
Mr. Chair,
go ahead, Amy.
I just want to point out just one quick thing. It's not the Board of Adjustment's job to find practical difficulties or to manufacture them. Really what you need to be doing is focusing on the applicant's claim of practical difficulty and whether that meets the criteria. So we don't want to redesign this entire project. We're looking at what's in front of us.
Good point. And the applicant's claim of practical difficulty was water, which we've addressed pretty thoroughly. Okay. That explained that pretty well, Clint. I think holding tanks too, as long as we're on the subject, not relevant to this question really, but holding tanks can be placed just about anywhere. Yeah, I think that would not be a real concern.
Move on. That's my bad. I'm fine.
Okay. All right. If nothing else to add to number 4, we'll go on to number 5. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Clint, starting with you.
The need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner. I don't believe so. You know, it's their wishes to put addition on. It's their wishes to keep a cabin where it is. You know, we can't use the actions from you know, it was a resort at one time and it got split up and that was way before our time, but actually for this variance, you know, it's pretty much just the landowner, I think.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Dave?
No, the need for the variance is because of the landowner or the prior landowners. Yes, it's the need for the variance is not created by actions other than the current landowner.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And Marv?
What I'm seeing is this here, you know, because this was, Clint pointed out, because this was part of a resort before, you know, and it was built so close, and here they created part of the issue, but now that it's tore down, this totally changes things, and it more so the landowner himself.
Thank you, Marv. Brent?
Yeah, I think Brian himself summed it up. He's kind of created this issue, and so I would say it was created by the landowner, and he's on a cease and desist or a stop order because of it.
Very good points, everybody. I have nothing to add. Can we move on to the 6th question? Anything to add, anybody, on number 5? Okay, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? We're going to start out with you, Mr. Brucher.
I would say no, it does not involve more than just economic considerations. I won't try to dig into any more than that, but I think that economically they could probably figure out some other way to do it. I guess that's up to them to figure it out, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Marv?
Well, you know, it does hugely come down to economics now. He's in it, or they're in it so deep that now moving it over is going to cost a considerable amount more. Have they thought of more than just the economics? Yes. They're thinking of the neighbors. They want to keep it like it was. Just wanted to make it livable. So does it involve more than economics? Yes, but right now it's, I would say 80-90% economics.
Thank you, Marv. Brent?
I think it does involve more than just the economic considerations. We've heard from the neighbor, I believe it was Mrs. Harms, that talked about the water issues. The practical difficulty is the water that we're looking at here as well. So there are the economic considerations, but there's more than just that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think everybody's made good points up, you know, to now. It's more than money, but it's mostly money at this point. It costs a lot of money to do the right thing sometimes. But the question states alleged practical difficulties, perceived practical difficulties. There are those. We don't agree with them, but they are there. So is it more than just money? It's personal bias. It's just the fact they've lived there forever. Lots of considerations besides just money, mostly money though. Clint?
I would just leave it with kind of what you and Brent, both of you had really good points. I'll just stay with that.
Okay. Okay, we've answered the questions to the best of our ability. We've considered the potential conditions that might help answer these questions. Are we ready for the vote? I don't hear a no. We'll proceed with the vote. Are we ready for the vote? I guess we are. Okay. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Begin with Clint.
With the conditions, yes.
Dave?
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with Clint.
Marv?
With the conditions, yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself is no. Number two, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Beginning with Marv.
Personally, the conditions help with it, but is it reasonable to have it that close and we have an opportunity to pull it back? I've got to say no.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
I'll say yes.
And Dave?
Yes.
Okay, number three, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
And Marv?
Yes.
Okay, number four, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? My answer is no. Clint?
No.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
And Brent?
No.
Number five, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Clint?
No.
Dave?
No.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Number six, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Dave?
No.
Marv,
Yes.
Brent,
Yes.
myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Okay, we've answered the 6 criteria questions. Questions number 4 and 5 were both a resounding no, 5 no's each. The rest were answered in the affirmative. Is there a motion at this time to deny this variance?
This is Brent, and I'd make a motion to deny the variance.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Clint will second that.
Okay. Motion made by Brent, Clint, seconded by Clint. Is there any discussion before we vote? If there's no discussion, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed say nay. We'll start with Marv.
Aye.
Brent,
Aye.
myself is aye. Clint
Aye.
and Dave.
Aye.
Okay, your variance request has been denied. Amy, could you clarify that a bit? What happens next for this applicant?
I can, Mr. Chair. So you do have the permit to replace the existing structure, so you can move ahead with that. It just won't include the proposed addition. And so if you are wanting to replace anything else, you need to make sure that your permit includes that. And so you can certainly give us a call during regular business hours to discuss that in more detail.
And Mr. The conditions are on you, whether you would want to adhere to those or not. So if there's nothing else at this time, Mr. Flanagan, you could call Land Services to clarify if needed. So let's move on with the next item of business, and that would be, I believe, the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion to accept those? Or is there any changes that need to be made?
This is Marv. I make a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Okay, and I'll second those. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Marv,
Aye.
Brent,
Aye.
myself is aye. Clint
Aye.
and Dave. Must have a pesky mute button, Dave. Or did we lose you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm on the wrong side of the mute button. Yes, I approve. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Is there any new business that should be transacted at this time? Amy, do you have a record of any?
No, Mr. Chair, I do not.
Is there any old business at this time?
I don't
Yep.
have any of that either, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I do.
Oh, yes, Sharon.
Okay.
Yes, we can stay until 10 o'clock if you
Oh,
want
yeah.
us to.
Actually, yeah. Now that Sharon started talking, that makes me remember. So Sharon, go ahead.
So we kind of had a little snafu with the whole per diems versus mileage sheets, whatnot. But we got it all settled. We're going back to the per diem sheets that you used to use, but the only thing that you have to fill out is your mileage. So just put in your mileage, sign it, and send it back to me. I would like to get those all sent off to admin by Friday after the following the meeting. So if I don't have it at that point, I will be just sending them through. So if you guys can just remember to get them over to me as soon as you can, that would be awesome. So I can get those processed as fast as I can for you.
Yep, and Mr. Chair, we do, our personnel policy as county employees, if I turn in mileage, that was incurred over 60 days ago, I don't get reimbursed. So time timely submittal of those is important, and we're not going to babysit it. So we just want you to, if you have questions, please ask, but it's on you to get that to us and be reimbursed and adhere to that 60-day turnaround time on that.
My only comment on that is that it seems to be a very cumbersome system that has been worked out, but I guess it's the system that the county wants. So either we go with it or we don't, as you pointed out.
Yep, and we are getting a new payroll system, and there will be some ability to go online and do that. Now, whether or not you guys will be set up in that, I'm not sure. But if we have the ability to streamline that for you, we absolutely will. But, you have to document it somehow. We do have to rely on you to write it down and tell us what it was.
Personally, I'd like to send you a spreadsheet every 2 months. But
I believe that I think Sharon could actually look at that, because if you just filled out the top part of the sheet and just said see attached, that might be okay. And if you want us to look into that, we certainly can.
I don't know what the other guys think. What do you think on the mileage system?
It'll be a lot easier once we get back to our in-person meetings, because you could just hand your sheet in that night when we're done.
Yes, good point. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, thanks, Sharon and Amy, for discussing that with us. And
I have one
reminding us.
question. I have one question. Can I bill for mileage if I get lost?
There's no
Well,
question.
if you follow me, you won't get lost. So
You all have a good evening.
All right,
wait, we got to adjourn first. We're not done.
Yep. Is there a motion to adjourn?
take a motion.
I think we're ready for that.
This is Marv. I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. I think all the ayes have it. We adjourned at 8:50 p.m.
All right.
Wow.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.